$1 million lakefront dream home destroyed in a suspicious blaze. A homeowners association president standing before the smoldering ruins, clipboard in hand, claiming it was just enforcing community standards. The moment she realizes the man in the sheriff's uniform is the son of the homeowner she's been targeting for months, some lines should never be crossed. For 30 years, Sheriff Ethan Maxwell had served Willow Creek County with unwavering dedication. From rookie deputy to county sheriff, he'd built a reputation for fairness and integrity that made him a respected figure in the community. I've seen this county transform from a quiet rural retreat to a sought-after destination. Lakes that once had simple fishing cabins now host million-dollar properties. But no matter how fancy the houses got, I always believed good neighbors were what made a community strong. Ethan's father, Arthur Maxwell, was a self-made man who had worked his entire life for one dream: retirement on the shores of Clearwater Lake. At 72, after decades of running his construction business, Arthur had finally broken ground on his dream home 3 years ago. Dad designed every inch of that house himself, his first after building homes for hundreds of families. The 3,800-foot timber and stone masterpiece took nearly 3 years to complete, with details like a hand-carved staircase my grandfather had started and Dad finished, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the lake like a living painting. But it wasn't just architecture, it was the culmination of a promise he'd made to my mother before she passed, that someday they'd wake up to that view together. He finished it a year after we lost her and told me he could still feel her presence in every room. Dad put everything into that house: his savings, his craftsmanship, his heart. When he finally moved in last year, I'd never seen him so content. He'd sit on that deck for hours, watching eagles soar over the water, telling me, "Son, this is what 45 years of hard work looks like." 3 months after moving in, Arthur suffered a massive heart attack. The prognosis was serious. He needed complex bypass surgery and faced months of rehabilitation. The night before his surgery, Dad squeezed my hand and said, "Take care of my house, son. It's my legacy." I promised him I wouldn't let anything happen to it, Ethan added, with a catch in his voice, a promise that would be tested in ways I never imagined. Arthur's house wasn't just any lakefront property. It stood out for its craftsmanship and thoughtful design, characteristics that made it both beautiful and a target. Dad built that house to blend with the natural surroundings. The stone was locally quarried, the timber responsibly harvested from the region. He designed it to withstand the harsh winters and capture the summer breezes off the lake. Other houses in the development were showy, all glass and imported marble, but Dad's place had soul. You could feel the difference the moment you walked in. Gwendolyn Vance once referred to it as rustic, like it was an insult. Dad took it as a compliment. What made the situation even more complicated was that Ethan had deliberately kept his relationship to Arthur low-key within the Lakeside Estates community. He'd always been careful to separate his personal life from his professional role as sheriff. In a county this size, everyone knows I'm the sheriff, but at the HOA meetings, I was just Arthur Maxwell's son, not there in any official capacity. Gwendolyn knew my last name was Maxwell, but in her obsession with revenge against my father, she never bothered to investigate me further or connect me to the sheriff's department. The Maxwell surname is common enough in our county that she didn't make the connection, and oversight her arrogance would soon cause her to regret. Maybe if she had bothered to get to know the community she claimed to be protecting, things would have turned out differently for everyone. Lakeside Estates had begun as a modest lakefront community, but as property values soared, so did expectations. The Homeowners Association, once focused on basic maintenance, had evolved into something more controlling under its newest president, Gwendolyn Vance. She moved to Lakeside Estates from Chicago about 2 years ago. She was a former corporate executive who'd lost her position in a whistleblowing scandal. The lake community was her fresh start, and she immediately began consolidating power. Within 6 months, she'd managed to get herself elected HOA president by promising a return to traditional values in the community. What most residents didn't know was that Arthur had testified against Gwendolyn's husband in a construction fraud case 15 years earlier, helping send him to prison. She'd recognized our family name the moment she saw it on the property records. Gwendolyn's ruthless campaign extended beyond Arthur. She targeted several longtime residents, all retirees who'd known each other for decades. One was a retired judge who presided over her husband's case, another a former prosecutor. It wasn't coincidence. She was systematically going after everyone connected to her husband's downfall, using the HOA as her weapon. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after Dad's surgery. It cited unauthorized structural modifications and demanded immediate remediation of the accessibility ramp Dad had installed for his recovery. The fine was $500. Dad had specifically designed the ramp to blend with the property's aesthetics, but Gwendolyn claimed it violated historical community standards that didn't actually exist in any bylaws. While Ethan visited his father in the hospital, more violations accumulated: unapproved exterior lighting, improper boat storage, unauthorized dock modifications. Each came with increasing fines and more threatening language. I called Gwendolyn to explain the situation, that my father was recovering from major surgery and would address these issues when he returned home. Her response chilled me to the bone. Rules don't change because someone gets sick. This isn't personal. It's about community standards, she claimed. But there was something in her tone that felt deeply personal. If he can't maintain standards, perhaps Lakeside Estates isn't the right community for him or anyone associating with him. As Arthur's recovery faced complications, the demands from the HOA intensified. Gwendolyn began sending weekly inspection reports with photographs documenting alleged violations, each accompanied by additional fines. The most ridiculous citation was for unapproved wildlife encouragement, because Dad had installed bird feeders. When I pointed out that several board members had identical feeders, Gwendolyn simply said, "There's our approved model." As a law enforcement officer, I faced a difficult position. Officially intervening could create a conflict of interest accusation that might compromise any future legal case. So I began quietly documenting every incident, consulting with the county attorney about potential harassment charges, and connecting with other targeted residents. I was building a case the right way, methodically and by the book, never imagining that Gwendolyn's vendetta would escalate to arson before I could complete my investigation. By the time Arthur was transferred to a rehabilitation facility, the HOA had placed a lien against his property, claiming over $330,000 in unpaid fines and emergency remediation costs. Ethan attended the HOA meeting that month, hoping to reason with the board. I didn't go as Sheriff Maxwell. I went as Ethan, a son trying to protect his father's interests. I explained Dad's medical situation and asked for reasonable accommodation until he could return home. Gwendolyn didn't just deny the request. She used it as an opportunity to make an example. She projected photos of Dad's property on the wall, calling it the exact kind of neglect that destroys community value. Then she looked me right in the eye and said, "If your father can't maintain his property to our standards, perhaps Lakeside Estates isn't the right community for him." As the meeting ended, Gwendolyn made one final statement that revealed her true motives. She told the board that certain residents were undesirable elements in their traditional community. When another member asked what that meant, Gwendolyn lowered her voice, not realizing I could still hear her, and said, "Some people don't deserve to retire in paradise, especially those who've ruined other families. We can make sure they understand they're not welcome here." It was then I realized this wasn't about rules or appearances. This was deeply personal. The first small victory came unexpectedly at a town council meeting where Gwendolyn was pushing for stricter HOA enforcement powers. I quietly submitted evidence of how her selective enforcement targeted specific residents with medical issues. Without revealing my connection to my father, I simply presented the facts as the county sheriff concerned about elder protection. The council unanimously rejected her proposal, and the look on her face when her plans crumbled was the first moment of justice in what would become a much larger reckoning. After 3 months of continuous harassment, Ethan decided to stay at his father's house for a weekend to address some of the cited issues. He arrived Friday evening to find a certified letter taped to the door. The letter stated that due to continued noncompliance, the HOA was invoking its emergency remediation clause. They would be sending contractors to correct violations the following Monday, with all costs billed to my father at a 150% markup. Ethan immediately called Gwendolyn, identifying himself both as Arthur's son and as the county sheriff. I want to be clear about this conversation, Gwendolyn. I'm not calling in my official capacity. I'm calling as the legal representative for my father, who's still in medical care. You cannot legally enter this property without proper authorization. Gwendolyn's voice carried the practiced calm of someone accustomed to getting her way. Actually, Sheriff Maxwell, if you read Section 12.4 of the Covenant, you'll see that by purchasing in Lakeside Estates, your father granted the association the right of access for maintenance enforcement. We are well within our rights. I've read the Covenant cover to cover, Ms. Vance. That clause applies only to common areas and easements, not to private residences. What you're proposing is trespassing. The conversation escalated quickly, with Gwendolyn's tone shifting from professional to personal. Gwendolyn insisted that her interpretation was backed by their attorney. When Ethan offered to have the county legal team review the documents, she became defensive. This is precisely the problem with your father's property, Sheriff. You people think the rules don't apply to you because of your position. Ethan's professional training in keeping calm during confrontations was tested like never before. You people? I repeated, making sure I'd heard correctly. Miss Vance, my father worked his entire life to build that house. He's followed every county code and regulation. The issues you're citing are aesthetic preferences, not safety violations. Gwendolyn's response revealed the true motivation behind her campaign, and she abandoned all pretense of professionalism. This community has standards for a reason, Sheriff, she said, her professional mask slipping. Your father's choices don't align with what Lakeside Estates represents. She paused, then added with barely concealed venom, people who destroy other people's lives don't get to enjoy paradise. That house will conform, or it will be gone. Her words carried a weight that went far beyond community guidelines. After the call, Ethan installed security cameras around the property, a precaution that would prove invaluable. Something about Gwendolyn's determination worried me. This wasn't just about community standards anymore. When someone becomes fixated on a goal, they sometimes cross lines they shouldn't. That Sunday evening, Ethan received a text message from a neighbor. Thought you should know, Gwendolyn was showing someone around your dad's property perimeter today. Guy in an expensive suit, taking notes. They were pointing at the house a lot. Gwendolyn's behavior had become increasingly erratic as her campaign against my father and the others dragged on without achieving her desired results. My father was recovering, the other residents were standing firm, and the small victory at the town council had clearly rattled her. In her desperation to finally destroy what my father had built, she was taking risks and making mistakes, the kind of mistakes that someone with her calculated nature would normally avoid. Her need for revenge was clouding her judgment, making her reckless in ways that would ultimately prove her undoing. Despite taking precautions, Ethan had to fulfill his official duties at the county commissioner meeting Monday morning. He arranged for deputies to monitor the property and installed temporary security cameras that would send alerts to his phone. The budget meeting started at 8 a.m. sharp. I was giving my department's annual report when the first alert came through at 8:23. I glanced at my phone and saw 3 unmarked trucks pulling up to Dad's property. Ethan continued his presentation, periodically checking the security alerts. At 9:15, his phone buzzed with another notification. The footage showed Gwendolyn arriving in her silver Mercedes SUV, directing workers where to park. The men didn't look like any contractors I'd ever seen. No company logos, no proper equipment. I recognized one of them. He'd been arrested twice for property damage and suspected arson. Ethan excused himself from the meeting, citing an emergency, and headed toward his father's property. I was about 10 minutes away when Deputy Harrison called. His voice was tense. Sheriff, they're pouring something around the foundation. Looks like they're dousing the deck too. This ISN.